The bullet tore through the canvas of the covered wagon, just inches from where Clara Ashford's head had been moments before, and she knew with absolute certainty that returning to the mountains where her father had once preached God's word would either save her life or end it. She pressed herself flat against the wagon bed, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. The outlaws had been tracking her for 3 days now, ever since she had witnessed them rob the stagecoach outside Sacramento. She had made the mistake of screaming when they shot the driver, and now they wanted to silence her permanently. The horses pulling her wagon were exhausted, foam flecking their mouths as they struggled up the rocky mountain pass. Clara knew she could not outrun them much longer. Another shot rang out, this one striking the wooden side panel with a sickening crack. She grabbed the reins with trembling hands and urged the horses faster, though the poor beasts had little left to give. The mountain trail was treacherous, winding through dense pines and jutting granite outcroppings. One wrong turn, and she would plummet hundreds of feet to her death. But staying on this path meant certain capture by the 3 men pursuing her. Then she saw it, a narrow gap between 2 massive boulders, barely wide enough for her wagon. Without thinking, Clara yanked the reins hard to the right. The wagon lurched violently, tilting on 2 wheels for a heart-stopping moment before crashing back down. She heard the outlaws shouting behind her as she squeezed through the opening, branches scraping against the canvas top. The passage opened into a small clearing, and beyond it she could see a thin trail of smoke rising from somewhere deeper in the forest. Civilization, or at least a cabin. She had no choice but to trust whoever lived there. Clara abandoned the wagon at the clearing's edge and ran toward the smoke, her long skirts tangling around her legs. Her lungs burned from the thin mountain air and exertion. Behind her, she heard the outlaws' horses and knew they had found the passage. She stumbled over a root and nearly fell, catching herself on a low-hanging pine branch that scratched her palm bloody. The cabin materialized through the trees like an answer to a prayer she had not yet formed. It was rough-hewn timber, sturdy and weathered with a stone chimney from which the smoke rose. Clara did not bother knocking. She grabbed the door handle and threw herself inside, slamming it shut behind her. "Please," she gasped, whirling around to face whoever occupied the dwelling. "Please, you have to help me. There are men. They are going to kill me." The man who stood from the rough wooden table was the largest human being Clara had ever seen. He had to be 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to fill the small cabin. His chest strained against a worn flannel shirt, muscles clearly defined even through the fabric. His arms were thick as tree trunks, corded with strength earned from years of mountain living. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, tied back loosely with a leather cord, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. But it was his eyes that caught her, a startling gray blue, like winter ice on a mountain lake. For a moment they simply stared at each other. Then recognition flickered across his weathered features, subtle as a shadow passing over stone. "Clara?" His voice was deep, rough from disuse, but there was something gentle in it. "Clara Ashford?" She blinked, her mind struggling to place him through the panic. Then memory crashed over her like a wave. She was 7 years old again, sitting in the front pew of her father's makeshift church in this very mountain range. The year was 1863, and her father, Reverend Thomas Ashford, had been a traveling preacher, bringing the gospel to mining camps and isolated settlements throughout the California wilderness. There had been a boy, maybe 10 years old, who came to every sermon with his father, a grizzled trapper. The boy had been tall even then, quiet and watchful, and he had always smiled at her with shy kindness. "Marcus," she whispered. "Marcus Dalton?" He nodded once, and something in his expression softened. But there was no time for reunion. The sound of horses and rough voices carried through the cabin's walls. Marcus moved with startling speed for a man his size. He crossed to her in 3 long strides and gripped her shoulders, his hands huge and warm. "How many?" "3. They have been chasing me since Sacramento. They are outlaws. They robbed a stagecoach, and I saw them, and now they want to kill me." The words tumbled out in a rush. Marcus released her and went to a trunk in the corner. When he turned back, he held a rifle that looked almost small in his massive hands. "Get in the back room. No matter what you hear, do not come out until I tell you." "But go, now." The authority in his voice was absolute. Clara obeyed, slipping through the door he indicated into a small bedroom. Through a gap in the wooden planks, she could see most of the main room. The cabin door burst open moments later. 3 men entered, all armed, their faces hard and cruel. The one in front was thin and wiry, with a scar running from his eye to his jaw. "We tracked a woman here. Where is she?" Marcus stood with his rifle held casually at his side, but Clara could see the tension in his powerful frame, like a coiled spring ready to release. "This is private property. You need to leave." The scarred man laughed, a sound like gravel scraping metal. "Big fellow, are not you? But there are 3 of us. Hand over the woman and we will leave you in peace." "There is no woman here, just me and my cabin." Marcus's voice remained level, but Clara saw his finger slide toward the trigger guard. The second outlaw, a heavy-set man with a tobacco-stained beard, took a step forward. "Now listen here, mountain man. We saw her wagon in the clearing. We know she came this way. You are harboring a witness to a crime, which makes you an accessory." "The only crime I see is 3 armed men breaking into my home." Marcus shifted his weight slightly, and Clara recognized it as a fighter's stance. Her father had always said Marcus's father raised him to be as tough as the mountains themselves. The third outlaw, younger than the others but with dead eyes that made Clara's skin crawl, drew his pistol. "Enough talking. Search the place." Everything happened in a blur. Marcus swung his rifle up and fired in one fluid motion. The young outlaw screamed and dropped his gun, clutching his shattered hand. Before the other 2 could react, Marcus had closed the distance to the scarred man and struck him across the jaw with the rifle butt. The crack of breaking bone was audible even in the back room. The man collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. The heavy-set outlaw managed to get his gun clear and fired. The bullet went wide, punching through the cabin wall. Marcus grabbed the man's wrist and twisted. Clara heard another snap, and then Marcus lifted the outlaw bodily and threw him through the open door. The man landed hard in the dirt outside and did not get up. The young outlaw with the ruined hand scrambled after him, cradling his injury and whimpering. The scarred man struggled to his feet, blood pouring from his mouth, and staggered out after his companions. Marcus followed them to the door, rifle ready, and watched until they managed to mount their horses and flee down the mountain trail. Only then did he lower his weapon. "Clara, you can come out." She emerged on shaking legs, staring at him with wide eyes. The entire confrontation had lasted less than a minute. Marcus set his rifle against the wall and turned to face her, and she saw that his hands were completely steady. Not even a tremor of adrenaline. "Thank you," she managed. "You saved my life." He studied her for a long moment, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks under that intense gaze. She was 22 years old now, not the little girl who had sat in her father's church 15 years ago. Marcus had to be 25, and the boy she remembered had become a man carved from granite and wilderness. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, scared, but not hurt." "Good." He moved to close the door and bar it. "They will not come back tonight. Cowards like that do not fight unless they have the advantage. But we should talk about what happened, why they were chasing you." Clara sank into one of the rough wooden chairs at his table, suddenly exhausted. The fear and flight of the past days crashed over her all at once. She told him everything, about traveling from San Francisco to visit her father's old mission circuits, about witnessing the stagecoach robbery, about the outlaws recognizing her and beginning their pursuit. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression grave. When she finished, he poured her a cup of water from a clay pitcher. "Your father, is he still preaching?" Pain lanced through her chest. "He passed 2 years ago. Consumption. He always said he wanted to die in the mountains where he had done his best work, but it took him in San Francisco instead." "I am sorry." Marcus sat across from her, and the chair creaked under his weight. "He was a good man. My pa always said Reverend Ashford was the only preacher who did not talk down to mountain folk." "Your father, is he? Died 5 years back. Took a fall checking his trap lines." Marcus's voice was matter-of-fact, but she saw old grief in his eyes. "It is just me now. Been living up here, trapping and hunting, same as he did." They sat in silence for a moment, 2 orphans who had found each other again in the wilderness. Outside, darkness was falling over the mountains, and Clara realized she had nowhere to go. Even if the outlaws did not return, she was alone, miles from any town, with only the clothes on her back. You can stay here, Marcus said, as if reading her thoughts. Long as you need, I will sleep in the barn. I cannot ask you to do that. This is your home. You are not asking. I am offering. He stood, his tall frame seeming to fill the cabin. There is stew on the fire. You should eat. Then we will figure out what comes next. The stew was simple but hearty, venison and root vegetables, and Clara ate ravenously. She had not realized how hungry she was. Marcus watched her with something like amusement in his eyes, and she blushed again. I apologize. I have not eaten properly in days. Do not apologize for having an appetite. Mountains teach you to eat when you can. He ladled more stew into her bowl without asking if she wanted it. After dinner, Marcus showed her the small bedroom. It was sparse but clean, with a bed covered in thick furs and a small chest for storage. I do not have much in the way of women's clothes, but there is a spare shirt that might work as a nightdress, and water for washing. This is more than enough. Thank you, Marcus. Truly. He nodded and turned to leave, but Clara reached out and touched his arm. Even through his shirt, she could feel the solid muscle beneath. I remember you, she said softly. From when I was a little girl. You always helped me climb the rocks after the sermons. You were kind to me. Something shifted in his expression, becoming almost vulnerable. I remember too. You had ribbons in your hair, yellow ones, and you laughed like music. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Clara did not quite understand. Then Marcus cleared his throat and stepped back. Sleep well, you're safe here. After he left, Clara changed into his spare shirt, which hung on her like a tent, and crawled beneath the furs. The bed smelled like pine and leather and something distinctly masculine. Despite everything that had happened, or perhaps because of it, she felt safer than she had in months. The last thing she thought before sleep claimed her was how Marcus's eyes had softened when he spoke of her yellow ribbons. She woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Morning light streamed through the small window, and she could hear Marcus moving around in the main room. Clara dressed quickly and emerged to find him cooking breakfast over the hearth fire. He had tied his long hair back again, and his shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms thick with muscle and corded veins. Morning, he said, glancing at her. How did you sleep? Better than I have in a long time. She moved to help, but he waved her back to the table. Sit. You're still recovering from being chased halfway across the mountains. Over breakfast, they talked more easily than Clara would have expected. Marcus told her about his life on the mountain, the rhythms of trapping and hunting, the harsh winters and brief, glorious summers. She told him about growing up in San Francisco after her father finally settled there, about learning to keep his books and help with his ministry work, about how lonely it had been after he died. Why did you come back to the mountains? Marcus asked. Clara stirred her coffee, watching the liquid swirl. I wanted to see the places he had preached, to feel close to him again. I thought maybe it would help me figure out what to do with my life now that he is gone. I have some money saved, but not enough to live on forever. I've been thinking about becoming a teacher, but I'm not certain. You would be good at that. You always had patience, even as a child. You remember that much about me? His ears reddened slightly beneath his tan. I remember everything about those sermon days. They were the highlight of my year. My pa was not much for talking, so hearing your father preach and seeing you, it made the isolation easier. Clara felt warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. I looked forward to them too, to seeing you. They held each other's gaze across the table, and Clara felt something shift between them, like a door opening after being locked for years. This was not the shy boy and the little girl anymore. They were adults, looking at each other with adult eyes, and what she saw in Marcus's expression made her breath catch. A sharp knock at the door shattered the moment. Marcus was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to the rifle. Stay back. He opened the door carefully, then relaxed. Sheriff Morton, what brings you up the mountain? The man who entered was in his 50s, wearing a tin star and a weathered expression. His eyes found Clara immediately. Miss Ashford, I presume. Got word from Sacramento about the stagecoach robbery. The driver survived long enough to say a young woman witnessed it. When we found your abandoned wagon, we feared the worst. She is safe, Marcus said. The outlaws who chased her tried to take her from my cabin yesterday. I sent them running. Sheriff Morton's eyebrows rose. That's so. Can you describe them, miss? Clara did, in as much detail as she could remember. The sheriff nodded grimly. That would be the Garrett gang. Nasty pieces of work. Been terrorizing this region for months. If you are willing to testify, we might finally be able to hang them. I will testify, Clara said firmly, though her hands trembled at the thought. Good. We have got them in custody in Jamestown. Caught them trying to get their wounds treated at Doc Harrison's place. Seems someone did a number on them. The sheriff looked at Marcus with new respect. Must have been quite a fight. Marcus shrugged his massive shoulders. They were not much. I will need you both to come to Jamestown to give statements. Miss Ashford, you will have to stay in town until the trial. Should not be more than a few weeks. We will make sure you have safe lodging. The thought of leaving Marcus's cabin, this unexpected sanctuary, filled Clara with surprising dismay. But she nodded. Of course, whatever is needed. I will bring her down tomorrow, Marcus said. Give her time to recover from the ordeal. After the sheriff left, promising to send word when the trial date was set, Clara and Marcus stood awkwardly in the cabin. The intrusion of the outside world had changed the easy intimacy of breakfast. You do not have to escort me, Clara said. I know you prefer to stay on your mountain. I am bringing you, Marcus said flatly. Those men have friends. You are not traveling alone until they are hanged. The protectiveness in his voice sent a shiver through her that was not entirely from fear. Thank you. They spent the rest of the day in quiet companionship. Marcus showed her around his property, the barn where he kept his 2 horses, the smokehouse where he preserved meat, the creek that provided fresh water year-round. Clara marveled at how he had built a completely self-sufficient life in this isolated place. There was something admirable about it, the sheer capability and strength required. As evening approached, they sat on a bench outside the cabin, watching the sunset over the mountains. The sky turned impossible shades of orange and purple, and the air grew crisp with the promise of a cold night. I used to dream about this, Marcus said quietly. When I was a boy, sitting with you, talking like this. Clara turned to look at him, her heart beating faster. You thought about me? All the time. He kept his gaze on the horizon, but his jaw was tight. My pa used to tease me about it, said I was mooning over a preacher's daughter like a lovesick fool. But every time your father's sermon circuit brought you back, I would count the days, and when you were gone, I would remember everything you said, every smile you gave me. Marcus, she reached out and took his hand, so large it engulfed hers completely. His skin was rough with calluses, warm and solid. I thought about you too. I used to beg my father to extend his time in the mountains. He never understood why I loved these trips so much. It was because of you. He turned to her then, and the intensity in his eyes made her feel like she might catch fire. You were a child. I'm not a child anymore. No, he agreed, his voice dropping to a rumble that she felt in her bones. You are not. He raised his free hand slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her cheek. His palm was warm, slightly rough, and she leaned into the touch without thinking. Clara, I do not have much to offer. Just this mountain, this cabin, and a life that is hard more often than it is easy. But if you wanted... She kissed him before he could finish, rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his. For a moment he froze, surprised, and then his arms came around her, and he was kissing her back with a hunger that matched her own. It was not her first kiss, but it might as well have been, because nothing had ever felt like this. Marcus kissed like he did everything else, with complete focus and barely restrained power. His beard was soft against her skin, his lips firm but gentle, and when he pulled her closer, she could feel the hard planes of his chest through her dress. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. I have been wanting to do that since I was 10 years old, Clara laughed breathlessly. You did not even know what kissing was when you were 10. I knew I wanted to be close to you. That was enough. He pulled back to look at her, his hands still on her waist. Stay with me, Clara. Not just until the trial. Stay here, on this mountain. Marry me where your father preached like it was always meant to be. Her heart soared and plummeted in the same instant. Marcus, we have known each other for 2 days. Well, we knew each other 15 years ago, but I have loved you for 15 years, he said simply. That is enough for me. But if you need time, I will wait. I've gotten good at waiting." Clara looked at this man, this mountain of strength and gentleness, and knew with sudden clarity that her soul had recognized him the moment she burst through his door. Maybe it was the fear and danger that had lowered her defenses. Maybe it was the memory of childhood affection ripening into adult love. Or maybe it was simply that some people were meant to find each other, no matter how many years or miles stood between them. "Ask me again after the trial," she said. "If you still want me then, I will say yes." The smile that broke across his bearded face was like the sun rising. "I will still want you." They sat together as full darkness fell, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his massive chest. She could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady, and she thought about her father preaching in these mountains, never knowing that he was planting seeds that would bloom into this moment. The next morning, they rode down to Jamestown together. Marcus had 2 horses, both sturdy mountain-bred animals, and he insisted Clara take the gentler of the 2. He rode beside her, watchful and protective, his rifle across his saddle. The trail was steep and treacherous in places, but he guided her through it with patience, pointing out hazards and beautiful vistas in equal measure. Jamestown was a bustling mining town, swollen with men seeking gold in the California hills. The main street was thick with mud from a recent rain, and the wooden sidewalks teemed with people. Clara felt overwhelmed by the noise and crowd after the peace of Marcus's mountain. Sheriff Morton met them at his office, a sturdy building near the center of town. He took their statements carefully, writing down every detail. When he was satisfied, he showed Clara to a boarding house run by a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Cooper. "You will be safe here," the sheriff assured her. "I will have a deputy nearby at all times, just as a precaution. The trial should start in 2 weeks." Marcus carried her few belongings up to the small room Mrs. Cooper indicated. When they were alone, he set down her bag and turned to her, looking uncertain for the first time since she had met him again. "I will be staying at the livery stable," he said, "but I will check on you every day, if you need anything." "I know." She took his hands, having to reach up to do so because of his height. "Thank you for everything, Marcus." He bent and kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender it made her eyes sting. 2 weeks. Then I will ask you again." Watching him leave felt wrong, like tearing off part of herself. Clara spent the rest of the day in a daze, trying to settle into the unfamiliar room, trying not to count the minutes until she would see him again. True to his word, Marcus appeared the next morning, and the morning after that. He would take her to breakfast at the town's small restaurant, then walk with her around Jamestown, pointing out landmarks and making quiet observations that revealed a sharp intelligence beneath his rough exterior. He was not comfortable in town, that much was clear. The buildings seemed too small for him, the crowds too pressing, but he endured it for her sake. On the 4th day, Clara convinced him to take her outside of town. They rode up into the foothills to a meadow carpeted with wildflowers. Marcus spread a blanket and they had a picnic lunch she had packed from the boarding house kitchen. "Tell me about your father's sermons," Marcus said, lying back on the blanket with his hands behind his head. "What was your favorite one?" Clara thought back, smiling at the memories. "He used to preach about finding God in the wilderness, about how the mountains and trees and rivers were all part of the divine creation. He said that people who lived close to nature understood the sacred better than city folk who only saw it in church buildings." "Smart man." Marcus reached out and took her hand, threading their fingers together. "I have always felt that. Up on my mountain, I feel closer to something greater than myself. Down here, everything is noise and greed. Then why stay? You could go back up. I am safe enough with the deputies watching." He turned his head to look at her, his gray-blue eyes serious. "Because you are here. And where you are is where I want to be." Her breath caught. They had been dancing around it for days, this growing thing between them, feeding it with conversations and small touches and lingering looks. But hearing him say it so plainly, with such certainty, made it real in a way that frightened and exhilarated her. "Marcus, what if I am not suited for mountain life? What if I cannot handle the isolation, or the hard work, or the long winters?" He sat up, still holding her hand. "Then we will figure it out together. Maybe we spend part of the year on the mountain and part in town. Maybe we find a place in between. I do not care where I live, Clara, as long as it is with you." You make it sound so simple. It is simple. I love you. Do you love me? The question hung in the air between them. Clara looked at this man, so strong and certain, offering her his whole heart without reservation. She thought about her life in San Francisco, the loneliness, the feeling of drifting without purpose. And she thought about waking up in his cabin, feeling safer and more at home than she had anywhere since her father died. Yes, she whispered, I love you. Marcus pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a passion that stole her breath. They sank back onto the blanket together, his large body covering hers, and for a long while there was nothing but the feel of his lips, his hands gentle despite their strength, the weight of him pressing her into the earth. When they finally broke apart, both flushed and breathing hard, Marcus touched her face with reverent fingers. I want to do this right. Marry you proper, with witnesses and vows. Where would your father have held the ceremony, if he was still preaching here? Clara thought about it, remembering her father's stories. There was a grove he loved, up near Angel's Camp. He said it had the most perfect clearing, with a circle of old oak trees. He performed dozens of marriages there. Then that is where we will go. After the trial, after you are safe and this is all behind us, I will take you to that grove and marry you in the place where your father joined so many lives together. Tears slipped down Clara's cheeks, but they were happy tears. He would have loved you, you know, my father. He always said the measure of a man was not his education or his wealth, but his character. And you have more character than anyone I have ever known. They rode back to town as the sun was setting, taking their time, savoring every moment together. When Marcus left her at the boarding house, he kissed her once more, slow and sweet, and Clara went to bed with her lips still tingling. The trial began on a Monday morning. The courthouse was packed with curious townspeople, eager to see the notorious Garrett gang brought to justice. Clara was nervous as she took the witness stand, her hands shaking as she placed them on the Bible to swear her oath. But then she saw Marcus in the back of the courtroom, his tall frame impossible to miss, and his steady gaze gave her courage. She told the truth clearly and calmly, describing exactly what she had witnessed. The defense attorney tried to rattle her, suggesting she had been mistaken in the chaos, but Clara did not waver. She knew what she had seen. When Marcus testified about the outlaws coming to his cabin and threatening Clara, there was a murmur through the courtroom. He described the fight with such matter-of-fact brevity that it took a moment for people to realize he had single-handedly defeated 3 armed men. The trial lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning with a guilty verdict on all counts. The judge sentenced the Garrett gang to hang, and the courtroom erupted in applause. Outside, Marcus swept Clara into his arms, lifting her clean off her feet despite the crowd watching. It is over. You are safe now. She clung to him, feeling the tension of the past weeks finally drain away. Take me to the grove. I do not want to wait anymore. He set her down, searching her face. Are you certain? We could have a proper wedding with invitations and a dress and all the things women dream about. I do not need any of that. I just need you, and I need to start our life together. She reached up to touch his bearded jaw. Marry me tomorrow, Marcus Dalton, in the place where my father joined hearts and souls. Let that be our beginning. His answer was a kiss that made the crowd around them whistle and cheer. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with emotion. Tomorrow, then. I will arrange everything. Marcus was as good as his word. The next morning, he arrived at the boarding house with a wagon and 2 horses. In the wagon bed were supplies for the journey and a dress, simple white cotton with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. I asked Mrs. Cooper what you might need, he said, looking embarrassed. She helped me pick it out. If you do not like it, it is perfect. Clara held up the dress, admiring it. The fact that this mountain man had thought to get her a wedding dress, had probably endured painful shopping and the prying questions of the shopkeeper, made her love him even more. They rode north toward Angel's Camp, taking the high trails Marcus knew well. The journey would take most of the day, but neither of them minded. The weather was perfect, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. As they rode, Marcus told her stories about growing up in these mountains, about the time he fought off a bear to protect his father's trapline, about learning to read from his mother before she died of fever when he was 6. about the loneliness of his life and how he had filled it with work and survival, never expecting to find the happiness that now seemed within reach. Clara shared her own stories, about nursing her father through his final illness, about the terror of witnessing the robbery and the desperate flight that had led her back to Marcus, about the strange sense of fate that had brought her to his door, of all the places in these vast mountains. "Do you believe in providence?" she asked as they stopped to rest the horses by a clear stream. Marcus considered the question, dipping his hands in the water to drink. "I believe that some things are meant to be. My pa used to say that the mountain provides what you need, if you are smart enough to recognize it. I needed you, Clara. I have needed you my whole life, and you came back to me." They reached the grove in late afternoon. It was exactly as Clara remembered from her father's descriptions, a perfect circle of ancient oak trees with a clearing in the center. Sunlight filtered through the leaves in golden shafts, and the grass was thick and green. There was a quality to the air here, something peaceful and sacred that made Clara understand why her father had loved this place. "It is beautiful," Marcus said softly. He helped her down from her horse and held her for a moment, as if unable to believe this was really happening. There was no one to perform the ceremony, but Marcus had thought of that too. He pulled out a small book from his saddlebag. "This was your father's. He gave it to my pa after one of the sermons, said it was a guide for frontier marriages when there was no preacher available. I thought maybe we could use his words to join us together." Clara took the worn book with trembling hands. She recognized it immediately, remembered her father writing in it by candlelight. Inside the front cover, his handwriting read, "For those who seek to be joined in love and faith, no matter the wilderness." They stood facing each other in the center of the clearing, the ancient oaks as their witnesses. Marcus held both her hands in his, and Clara opened the book to the page her father had marked. "I, Marcus Dalton, take you, Clara Ashford, to be my wife," Marcus said, his deep voice steady and sure. "I promise to love you in sickness and in health, in hardship and in ease, for as long as we both shall live. I will protect you, provide for you, and honor you all my days." Clara's voice shook as she spoke her own vows. "I, Clara Ashford, take you, Marcus Dalton, to be my husband. I promise to love you faithfully, to stand beside you in all circumstances, to build a home and a life with you. For as long as we both shall live, you are mine, and I am yours." There were no rings, but Marcus had fashioned a band from braided leather and silver wire, surprisingly delicate work from such large hands. He slipped it onto her finger, and Clara noticed his own hands were shaking slightly. "By the power of our own free will and the grace of God," Clara read from her father's book, "I declare us husband and wife." They sealed the vows with a kiss, and Clara felt something shift in the universe, like a door closing on her old life and opening onto something new and unknown and wonderful. When Marcus lifted her into his arms and spun her around, laughing, she felt lighter than air. They made camp in the grove that night, spreading bedrolls beneath the stars. Marcus built a fire and cooked a simple meal, and they ate sitting close together, his arm around her shoulders. The night was full of sounds, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, the crackle of burning wood. "I never thought I could be this happy," Marcus admitted. "I had accepted that I would live and die alone on my mountain, and now I have you, and it feels like a dream I am afraid to wake from." "It is not a dream." Clara turned in his arms to face him, the firelight casting dancing shadows across his strong features. "I am real, and I am yours, and this is our life now." They made love for the first time under the oaks where they had wed, slowly and tenderly, learning the shape and feel of each other. Marcus was gentle despite his strength, so careful with her, and Clara felt cherished in a way she never had before. Afterward, they lay wrapped in each other's arms, listening to the night sounds of the forest. "Tell me what our life will be like," Clara whispered. Marcus stroked her hair, his fingers gentle. "We will live on the mountain. I will teach you to hunt and fish and trap if you want to learn. In the winter, we will keep the fire burning and read together and wait for spring. In the summer, we will ride down to town for supplies and to visit. We will build a life, piece by piece, day by day. And maybe, if we are blessed, we will fill that cabin with children who will grow up strong and free in these mountains." The image he painted filled Clara with warmth and longing. I want that. All of it. They stayed in the grove for 3 days, existing in a bubble of newlywed bliss. Marcus proved to be surprisingly playful when he allowed himself to relax, chasing her through the trees and catching her up in his arms, teaching her to skip stones in the stream, telling her stories that made her laugh until her sides ached. But eventually, they had to return to the real world. They packed up their camp and began the journey back to Marcus's mountain. As they climbed higher into the wilderness, Clara felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she belonged. Not in San Francisco with its fog and loneliness, but here, in these wild mountains with this wild man who loved her. When Marcus's cabin came into view, Clara realized it was no longer just his cabin. It was their home. She saw it with new eyes, already planning where she could plant a garden, where they might build an addition when children came. The first weeks of marriage were an adjustment. Clara had to learn the rhythms of mountain life, the endless small tasks required to survive. Marcus taught her to preserve meat, to tan hides, to identify which plants were edible and which were poison. She was not naturally skilled at all of it, and there were frustrating moments when she burned dinner or ruined a pelt she was trying to cure. But Marcus never lost patience with her. He would demonstrate again, his large hands surprisingly deft, and praise her when she got it right. In turn, Clara brought her own skills to their home. She could read and write far better than Marcus, who had only basic literacy. She began teaching him in the evenings, and his pride when he successfully worked through a difficult passage was endearing. She also brought beauty to the cabin. She made curtains from fabric they bought in town, arranged wildflowers in jars, organized his chaotic collection of tools and supplies. Marcus would watch her puttering around, a small smile on his bearded face, as if he could not quite believe she was real. Their love life was passionate and frequent. Marcus could not seem to keep his hands off her, pulling her into his arms while she cooked, kissing her neck while she mended clothes, making love to her with an intensity that left them both breathless. Clara discovered she had a passionate nature she had never suspected, responding to his touch with enthusiasm that sometimes made him laugh with delight. Summer turned to autumn, and the mountains blazed with color. Clara had never seen anything so beautiful. The hillsides, painted in shades of red and gold and orange. They took long rides together, Marcus showing her his favorite spots, the hidden valleys and crystal lakes known only to mountain men. It was on one of these rides that Clara first felt the telltale signs of pregnancy. The nausea hit her suddenly as they were climbing a steep trail, and she had to stop and dismount. Marcus was beside her instantly, his face creased with concern. "What is wrong? Are you ill?" Clara steadied herself against a tree, waiting for the wave of sickness to pass. When it did, she turned to him with wonder. "I think I might be with child." The expression that crossed his face was indescribable, joy and awe and terror all mixed together. "Are you certain?" "Not completely, but the signs are there." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat belly. "Our baby might be growing in here right now." Marcus dropped to his knees before her, pressing his forehead to her stomach. His shoulders shook, and Clara realized with amazement that he was crying. She had never seen him cry, not once in all their time together. Marcus? Are you all right?" He looked up at her, tears tracking through his beard. "I never thought I would have this. A wife, a child, a family. I thought I was meant to be alone, and now you have given me everything." Clara sank down to join him, holding his face in her hands. "We are giving it to each other, and we will raise our child with love in these mountains just as we planned." They rode home slowly, Marcus hovering over her with protective concern that would have been amusing if it had not been so touching. That night, he would not let her lift anything heavy or work too hard, insisting she rest while he did the evening chores. As the weeks passed and Clara's pregnancy became certain, Marcus became even more protective. He would not let her chop wood or haul water or do any of the heavier tasks. When she protested that she was pregnant, not helpless, he would just shake his head stubbornly. "You are carrying our child, the most precious thing in the world. I will not risk either of you." The first snow came in late October, earlier than usual. Marcus had prepared well, with stores of food and firewood that would last them through the winter. The cabin became a cozy refuge against the cold, the fire always burning, the windows sealed against the wind. Clara discovered she liked the enforced intimacy of winter. With nothing to do but survive and be together, she and Marcus grew even closer. They would read together by firelight, Marcus slowly working his way through books Clara had brought from San Francisco. They would talk for hours about everything and nothing, learning the depths of each other's minds and hearts. And they would make love, often and inventively, Marcus careful to accommodate Clara's changing body. He was fascinated by her pregnancy, constantly touching her growing belly, talking to the child within. When the baby first kicked, he was so excited he lifted Clara and spun her around, then immediately set her down and apologized for being too rough. Christmas came, and Marcus surprised her by riding down to Jamestown through the snow to get supplies for a special dinner. He returned with a small turkey, dried fruit for pie, and a present wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a book, a collection of poetry that Clara had mentioned wanting months ago. She had not thought he was paying attention, but he remembered everything she said. "I cannot read most of it yet," he admitted, "but you can teach me, and we can read it together." Clara threw her arms around his neck, breathing in his familiar scent of pine and wood smoke. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "I know the feeling." He rested his hand on her rounded belly where their child grew strong and active. "This is everything I ever wanted, right here in this cabin." The winter passed in a blur of contentment. Clara grew large with pregnancy, moving more slowly but glowing with health. Marcus doted on her, bringing her anything she wanted, rubbing her aching back and swollen feet, reading to her when she was too tired to read herself. Spring came late, breaking the snow's hold gradually. By the time the meadows began to green, Clara was heavily pregnant and starting to feel anxious about the birth. The nearest doctor was in Jamestown, hours away on a good day, impossible to reach quickly if something went wrong. Marcus sensed her fear. "We will be fine," he assured her. "Mountain women have been having babies up here forever, and if there are any problems, I will get help, I promise." "You cannot promise that. What if the baby comes too fast? What if something goes wrong?" He took her face in his hands, his gray-blue eyes intense. "Then we will handle it, together. You are the strongest woman I know, Clara. You can do this." His faith in her was absolute, and it steadied her own nerves. When the labor pains started on a warm April evening, Clara was frightened but ready. Marcus had prepared everything, clean cloths and hot water and a sharp knife for the cord, learning what he could from the few medical books they had. The labor was long and hard. Clara labored through the night and into the next day, Marcus never leaving her side. He held her hand when the pains were bad, encouraged her when she wanted to give up, wiped the sweat from her face with gentle hands. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, their son entered the world with a lusty cry. Marcus caught him, his hands shaking, and placed the squalling infant on Clara's chest. She was exhausted and in pain, but when she looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and perfect, she felt a love so overwhelming it brought fresh tears to her eyes. "A boy," Marcus breathed, his voice full of wonder. "We have a son." They named him Thomas after Clara's father. He was a big baby, which did not surprise Clara given Marcus's size, with a thick shock of dark hair and lungs that could wake the dead. Marcus was besotted from the first moment, holding his son with infinite care, despite his massive hands, singing to him in a rumbling bass that seemed to soothe the infant's cries. Watching her huge, tough mountain man husband cradle their tiny son, Clara fell in love with Marcus all over again. He was so gentle with Thomas, so patient, rising in the night to bring the baby to Clara for feeding, changing dirty cloths without complaint, walking the floor with him when he was fussy. "I never knew you could be this soft," Clara teased him one evening, watching him make silly faces at Thomas. "Only with you and him," Marcus replied, not looking away from his son. "The rest of the world still sees the mountain man. But for my family, I can be whatever you need." The first year of Thomas's life flew by in a blur of sleepless nights and small joys. Clara discovered that motherhood came naturally to her, and Marcus was a devoted father despite having no example to follow. They worked together seamlessly, supporting each other through the challenges of raising an infant in the wilderness. When Thomas took his first steps, Marcus built a wooden fence around the cabin so the boy could play safely outside. When Thomas spoke his first word, which was "Pa," Marcus picked him up and tossed him in the air, both of them laughing. Clara watched them together and knew she had made the right choice in marrying her mountain man. As Thomas grew into a toddler, Clara found herself pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to do. The birth was shorter too, and their daughter entered the world on a snowy December morning, tiny and perfect and dark-haired like her brother. They named her Sarah, after Marcus's mother. She was a quieter baby than Thomas had been, content to watch the world with serious gray eyes that reminded Clara of her father. Marcus was just as gentle with his daughter as he had been with his son, cradling her against his broad chest while she slept. 2 children, Clara marveled, watching Marcus hold Sarah while Thomas played at his feet. We have made a family. The best family. Marcus looked up at her, his eyes full of love. Thank you for giving me this, Clara, for taking a chance on a lonely mountain man. Thank you for saving me, she replied. In every way a person can be saved. The years flowed into each other like water. Thomas grew tall and strong like his father, learning to trap and hunt almost as soon as he could walk. Sarah was quieter but brilliant, taking after Clara's love of books and learning. They had a 3rd child, another son they named James, who arrived when Thomas was 5 and Sarah was 3. The cabin that had seemed so spacious when Clara first arrived grew cramped with a family of 5. Marcus built an addition, doubling the size of their home, adding a separate bedroom for the children and a larger main room. He built furniture with his own hands, a proper table and chairs, beds for the children, shelves for Clara's growing collection of books. They made regular trips to Jamestown, now traveling as a family. The townspeople who had once viewed Marcus with wary respect now greeted him warmly, asking after his wife and children. Clara became friends with other mothers in town, and the children made playmates their own age. But they always returned to the mountain. It was their home, their sanctuary, the place where their love had bloomed and their family had taken root. Clara could not imagine living anywhere else now. She had become a true mountain woman, capable and strong, able to hunt and fish and preserve food alongside her husband. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Marcus took Clara back to the grove where they had married. The children stayed with a trusted neighbor in town, giving their parents a rare few days alone. The grove was just as beautiful as Clara remembered, the ancient oaks standing sentinel over the clearing. 10 years, Marcus said, holding her close under the stars. The best 10 years of my life. Mine too. Clara tilted her head back to look at him. He was 40 now, his dark hair threaded with silver, his beard more gray than brown. But he was still strong, still solid, still her rock. Do you ever regret it, giving up your solitary life for a noisy family? Not for a single second. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. You and the children are everything. I would give up 1,000 solitary lives for one day with you. They renewed their vows under the oaks, speaking the same words they had spoken a decade ago, meaning them even more now. Their love had been tested by hardship and blessed by joy, and it had only grown stronger. When they returned home, Clara was pregnant again, their 4th and final child. Another daughter arrived the following spring, a tiny thing they named Rebecca. She was the baby of the family, spoiled by her older siblings and utterly adored by both parents. The children grew. Thomas became a mountain man like his father, learning the wilderness with the same natural skill Marcus possessed. At 18, he left to explore farther territories, promising to return and eventually settle nearby. Sarah married a shopkeeper from Jamestown when she was 20, a kind young man who loved her fierce intelligence. They settled in town but visited often, bringing Clara's grandchildren to run wild on the mountain. James took after both parents, strong like his father, but with his mother's love of learning. He became a teacher, working in small mountain communities, bringing education to isolated children just as Clara's father had brought faith. And Rebecca, the baby, showed an artistic talent no one expected, drawing and painting the mountains with a skill that left everyone amazed. Marcus and Clara watched their children grow and leave and build their own lives, proud of what they had created together. The cabin grew quieter as the children established their own homes, but it never felt empty. It was filled with memories, with love, with the life they had built together. On their 25th anniversary, their children arranged a surprise celebration in the grove. Thomas rode in from Montana, where he was working as a guide. Sarah came from Jamestown with her husband and 3 children. James traveled from the mountain school where he taught. Rebecca arrived from San Francisco where she was studying art. They all gathered under the oaks with their families, and a preacher from Jamestown performed a renewal ceremony. Clara stood with Marcus, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, and marveled at how far they had come from that terrifying day when she had burst through his door. She had been running for her life, never knowing she was running toward it. "I love you," she told Marcus, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I have loved you since I was 7 years old, and you helped me climb rocks. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." Marcus pulled her close, this woman who had transformed his lonely existence into a life full of love and laughter. "And I love you, Clara, my wife, my partner, my everything. You made me believe in providence, in fate, in God's plan, because nothing but divine intervention could have brought you back to me." They kissed as their family cheered, and the mountains echoed with joy. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythm of mountain life. Marcus and Clara grew old together, their bodies wearing the marks of hard living, but their love burning as bright as ever. They became the patriarch and matriarch of a sprawling family, with grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren scattered across California. Marcus was 70 when his body finally began to fail him. A lifetime of hard mountain living had taken its toll, and his powerful frame grew frail. Clara nursed him with the same fierce devotion he had always shown her, refusing to let him give up, reading to him from her father's books, reminding him of all the beautiful years they had shared. "I am not ready to leave you," he told her one evening, his voice weak but determined. "There is so much more I want to do with you." "Then do not leave yet," Clara said, holding his hand. "Stay with me a while longer." And he did, rallying with stubborn mountain strength. He lived to see his 80th birthday, surrounded by 4 generations of family in the cabin he had built with his own hands. He lived to dance with Clara one more time at their 50th wedding anniversary, moving slowly but surely in the clearing where they had wed. He lived to see Thomas settle on a nearby mountain with his own wife and children, carrying on the family tradition. He lived to see Sarah's children grown and married. He lived to see James become headmaster of a school in Sacramento. He lived to see Rebecca's paintings displayed in galleries throughout California. When Marcus finally passed quietly in his sleep on a cold winter night, Clara was beside him. She held his hand as his breathing slowed and stopped, and though her heart shattered, she did not regret a single moment. They had built a life together that would echo through generations, a love story that their children and grandchildren would tell for years to come. Clara lived another 5 years without him, cared for by her children, but never quite whole again. When she died at 78, it was in the cabin they had shared, in the bed they had made love in, surrounded by the life they had created. They buried her beside Marcus in the grove where they had married, under the ancient oaks that had witnessed their vows. The entire family gathered for the funeral, dozens of people whose existence traced back to a terrified young woman bursting through a cabin door and finding salvation in the form of a mountain man who had loved her since childhood. Thomas, now in his 60s, spoke at his mother's funeral. "My parents taught me that love is not just a feeling. It is a choice you make every day, to stand beside someone through hardship and joy, to build something that lasts beyond your own life. They chose each other in this grove 53 years ago, and they never stopped choosing each other until death parted them. That is the legacy they left us. That is what they built in these mountains." The family returned to the grove every year after that, on the anniversary of Marcus and Clara's wedding. They would gather under the oaks and tell stories about the mountain man and the preacher's daughter who found each other twice, once as children and once as adults, and built a love that would outlast the mountains themselves. And sometimes when the wind moved through the oak trees just right, it almost sounded like voices, deep and rumbling and soft and sweet, still speaking vows of eternal love in the place where Clara's father had once preached about finding God in the wilderness. Because that is what Marcus and Clara had found in each other, something sacred and eternal, a love that was as wild and enduring as the mountains that witnessed it. Their story became legend in those parts of California, told around fires and in schoolrooms, a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures come from the simplest acts of faith. Faith in providence, faith in love, faith that when you find the person your soul recognizes, you should hold on with everything you have and never let go. The cabin Marcus built still stands, maintained now by the 7th generation of their family. People come from all over to see it, to walk the trails Marcus walked, to stand in the grove where he and Clara pledged their lives to each other. And every visitor feels it, that sense of something sacred lingering in the mountain air, the echo of a love story that began with a little girl in yellow ribbons and a shy mountain boy, and ended with two souls reunited in eternity, together forever in the wilderness they called home.